My name's Lindsey Hilsum. I'm the international editor of Channel 4 News, and I'm very lucky to be here with Andrey. I've been in Ukraine a lot, reporting for the last couple of years since the war, and also before that in 2014. Andrey Kurkov, as you know, is one of Ukraine's most famous and brilliant writers. You know, I think I've only really begun to understand recently how many brilliant writers you have in Ukraine, and it's a sort of byproduct of this dreadful war, is that we've begun to understand a bit more about Ukrainian literature and Ukrainian culture. Probably Andrey's most famous book he wrote in 1996, which is called Death and the Penguin, which I would thoroughly recommend, particularly for any of you who want to keep a penguin in your bath and call it Misha. And then we have Grey Bees, which is set after the 2014 invasion of Donetsk, which I think was published in 2017. And this book, which has just come out in English, Jimi Hendrix Live in Lviv, which is a wonderfully surreal and strange book, but which was written in 2012.
Yeah.
So I thought we'd start off by talking about the book, and then we talk about language and culture, and then move on to talking about what's happening in Ukraine today, and of course there will be time for questions. So let me start. So Jimi Hendrix Live in Lviv, which is full of improbable, slightly surreal characters and happenings, but written in 2012, does it feel very distant to you now? Because that's, of course, before all these terrible things happened.
Well, I wouldn't say it is. It feels distant. Good evening. Sorry, it didn't
Yes.
say hello. Yeah. In fact, I mean, the war divided the time in the lives of Ukrainians. So now we have the time before the war and the time during the war. I look forward to live in the time after the war, but it won't be probably easy. But I have some kind of nostalgia now about this 2 years that I was writing the novel and traveling to Lviv every month, sometimes 2 times a month. So I mean, it was different Ukraine, different life, and of course it was different Lviv, although Lviv remained a magic city, and it became actually a hub for the majority of intellectuals of Ukraine and creative people after the beginning of the new invasion. And today is the last day of Lviv's book forum, so I mean it is cultural capital of Ukraine.
But one of the, I mean, amongst the characters in there are these old hippies, and the being of a hippie was a sort of anti-Soviet thing. I mean, I was fascinated by that, and it made me think. And, you know, the whole Jimi Hendrix thing, it made me think of Václav Havel and Frank Zappa and the Plastic People of the Universe. I don't know how many of you remember all of these kind of important cultural things in Soviet and post-Soviet life. Did that inform you, all of that?
Well, I have a brother who
Right.
is 7 years older, and he was a hippie in the Soviet time. I knew his friends, but he was not only a hippie, he was a dissident. He was arrested once, and my mother had to pay bribe to the judge for him not to go into prison. He received suspended sentence, and of course, I mean, he was imprisoned for the illegal circulation of literature, anti-Soviet literature. But he was accused of breaking into ice cream kiosk.
Ah!
Yeah, but at the same time, I mean, the KGB people were after serious dissidents, after illegal literature, and of course they were also after hippies, but hippies were not considered political dissidents, they were cultural dissidents. They were under influence of decadent Western culture, so I mean, they were dangerous in the educational sense, that they influenced the society around them. So they were beaten up, they were detained for 10 or 15 days, and of course, there were 3 centers of hippie movement in the Soviet Union. One was Lithuania,
Right.
Kaunas and Vilnius. And actually in Kaunas there was a case when the persecution of hippies led one hippie to burn himself alive.
Oh, really?
Yes, and this was in the end of 70s. It had a huge impact on all the community. But the other center was in Western Ukraine, in Lviv. And the only hippie band was active actually in Lviv. It was called Super Vujki. And the songs were quite anti-Soviet. I mean, I can quote one,
Yeah.
but you can find on YouTube or somewhere in the internet, because actually they were singing outside next to the hostel of one of the colleges and next to the regional Communist Party bureau. And the song which forced KGB or forced them to shut up for many years was called, for those who understand Ukrainian, Srav Pes na KPRS. So I mean the dog was shitting on the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. This was the refrain. So after they sang this song, the instruments, musical instruments, were confiscated. They were told that they will be put in prison if they try again to get together. And they got together when I published this book, because I wrote about them in the book. And they got together and they started again playing the same songs. And they were already in 2012, they were 70 years old, 75 years old. They're still around. But I thought that actually the history of Soviet hippies was forgotten, but the hippies were still around. And Lviv was and still is the city where you can see these hippies. I mean, one of the characters, actually, in the book I have 6 characters. 3 of them are real people of Lviv,
right,
under their real names with their addresses. And one of them, and they're all on Facebook, you can find them.
Oh, wow.
And you can ask them the questions, they are quite open. But one of them is the founder of hippie movement in Ukraine, Alik Alisevich, and he is now the main archivist of hippie movement. So he has the biggest collection of the documents, of the photos, of different memoirs, etc. And of course, I mean, there are 2 stories in the book,
yeah,
which are united by the 3rd story. I don't want to talk too much about the content.
You don't want to do any spoilers.
Yes, but I would say so. There is a real or almost real story of the Lviv hippies, and there is an invented story of an ex-student of medical college, Taras, who gave up studies, but who found a good way to earn money, because the streets in Lviv were always famously bad. They're cobblestones with holes, and so he invented the way how to help people who are suffering from kidney stones. So he's taken them for a drive in the night, and there are streets of different vibrations, so he has his own method.
Very funny.
Yeah, so he's making money by...
Provided you haven't got kidney stones. When I was reading that bit, I thought, I'm glad I don't have kidney stones, because I might not find it quite so funny if I did.
Yeah. And he's in love with the girl Darka, who works in the exchange bureau, but she wears very long gloves because she has allergy to money.
She was my favourite character. The girl who works in the exchange and is allergic to money. I thought that was inspired.
Yeah. So I mean, it's adventure novel. I mean, it's a novel with a lot of elements of surrealism, humor, black humor. And I mean, when I was writing about hippies, of course, I mean, I invented a lot of things, including the very important moment in the book that Jimi Hendrix has his own small grave also in Lviv, because Lithuanian hippies in America illegally exhumed his body and took away his right hand, and this right hand is buried on the Chakov Cemetery, where in the night of the death of Jimi Hendrix on 19th of September, hippies get together to celebrate his life. So, of course, I mean, this is just fantasy.
Oh, really? I thought it was true.
Yeah, but what happened, I mean, because I was talking so often to hippies, and Alec was involved, I mean,
yes,
all the real characters, they wanted to know everything what is written about them. So I was coming every month to read them chapters in which they are present. And Alik and Yurko Vinichuk, the other real character, very good Leaves author, they were always happy. But Oksana, who is also the leading female character in the book, she wanted me to make her less masculine, less strong, because she's very strong. I mean, she's involved in
lots. Very strong.
Yeah. But she didn't want to look like this in the book, so I was trying to make her softer. It was very difficult.
One of the things I've read that you've said, and I think this comes out of this book and your other books as well, which I'm interested in, and obviously this is a generalization about character, Ukrainian character, Russian character. So you talk about Russia being a collective culture, and Ukraine being an individualist culture, and Russia being an authoritarian culture, and Ukraine being a sort of anarchic culture.
Yeah.
And I think that the anarchy definitely comes across in your books. Can you explain a bit more what you mean by that?
Well, I mean, it's very easy to explain, in fact, because Russia was always a monarchy.
Yeah.
So, I mean, when the Soviet Union collapsed, different parts of the Soviet Union went to their previous matrix. So, I mean, the Soviet Union, which was also a monarchy in a way, because 5 out of 6 general secretaries of the Communist Party were re-elected until they died. And the only one who was thrown out from the Kremlin was Ukrainian Nikita Khrushchev.
Right.
But generally, I mean, in Russia there is a tradition of idea that stability is more important than freedom. And the symbol of stability is Tsar.
Yes.
So you have to love your Tsar. If you are upset by him or you are angry, you kill this Tsar and you love the next one. Ukraine never had royal family starting from 15th, 16th century. It was independent territory. They say it is like Cossack state,
yes.
But it was almost state because I mean there were no fixed borders because Cossacks were fighting with Poles, with Russians, with Turks, then together with Crimean Tatars against Poles, etc. But there was diplomatic service, and you can find correspondence of Ukrainian hetmans with Turkish Ottomans, for example. There was legal system, there were courts. There was no Ukrainian currency because it was like after the collapse of the Soviet Union, Ukrainian Cossacks were paying each other with Polish silver, Turkish gold, etc.
Right.
But the main thing is that Ukrainians were choosing their leaders. So hetman was chosen, just like elected.
So it was like a democracy.
Yeah, it was like democracy, and every.
So what are we talking? 16th century?
Well, 16th, 17th century,
yeah.
And of course, once a hetman was chosen, several weeks later there would be people who were unhappy about him and would like to replace him with another hetman. So right. I mean, like this, the Ukrainians have
a bit like the British Conservative Party.
No.
Sorry, go on.
Not at all. But what I want to say that actually Ukrainians are used to the idea that their country depends on them.
Yes.
So I mean, because I mean, Russian typical feature is fatalism. They don't
right.
believe they can do anything, and they don't protest even now.
Yeah.
So they rather go abroad, escape, than organize any opposition or protest against the war, etc. Ukrainians, when they are unhappy, they go out to the street. They organize yes. Maidans, and you know,
which we have seen. What about the anarchic street? Because I think I feel something of that in Ukraine. There isn't a sort of an anarchic street.
The biggest anarchic army in the world was organized by Nestor Makhno in 1918 in Ukraine during the Civil right. War. And generally, I mean, Ukraine is the country with more than 400 political parties registered in the Ministry of Justice wow. because every Ukrainian, when he wants to go into politics, he starts his own party because he doesn't find interest in party around. And the parties actually, unfortunately, very often are not ideological. They are leaders' party. So, I mean, like, I created my own party. It is party, my name, like Poroshenko's bloc yes. or Zelensky's party. It's not liberal or conservative or Christian Democrats.
But what's really fascinating about that, because is the amount of unity that there has been since the war. Now, I'm aware that some of that is on the surface and there is disunity as well. We're talking about human beings. But there is a large amount of unity, which is really interesting given what you've just told us about the culture.
I will explain.
Yes, please.
Yeah,
That's why you're here.
Yes. In fact, actually, because of the danger of losing the country where you are free, Ukrainians immediately united to save the country. Because, I mean, Ukrainians are free and independent and individualists only if they live on the territory of individualism and freedom.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, when Russians come, I mean, like what they are doing on the occupied territories,
Yeah.
they immediately start total control of people, filtration camps,
Yeah.
they are spying on people,
Yeah.
they are sort of asking them to spy on each other.
It's horrible. Yeah.
They are threatening people who are not obviously loyal to the occupants. They were actually deporting people back to Ukraine from the occupied territories.
Yeah.
And they were promising to take away children from the parents who were actually organizing online connection for their kids with Ukrainian schools.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Really, how all of that has been. But there is some disunity, as you would expect, and one of the issues over which there is disunity is about language. And you have got rather caught in the crosshairs of this, haven't you? Because you write in Russian.
Well, I write fiction in Russian, I write non-fiction in Ukrainian and English, and I write now books for kids in Ukrainian.
But your writing novels in Russian people have criticized you for that.
For 30 years.
For 30 years?
Yes, I was involved in lots of discussions like this, but I think there is Russian language literature in Ukraine, there is Crimean Tatar language literature in Ukraine. These are minority literatures, but they belong to Ukraine because they are written by Ukrainian citizens about Ukraine. And actually, I mean, when the books are translated, both from Russian or Ukrainian, they represent Ukrainian literature abroad.
Absolutely, but I suppose what I'm asking is whether it's painful for you to be criticised for writing in Russian, and for your books. I mean, many bookshops, I'm told that the Lviv bookshop at the book forum is not carrying your books in the original Russian at all,
Well,
and there is certainly a movement against the Russian language. I mean, I've come across lots of Ukrainians who, say that Russian was their first language, but they will no longer speak it. I don't know what you feel about that.
Well, I mean, you can understand why everything Russian is hated in Ukraine.
Yes.
It is hated also by the Russian speakers and by ethnic Russians in Ukraine. And actually, one of the first victims among civilians in Ukraine were the inhabitants of Mariupol.
Yes.
It's a city with 500,000 of population, Russian-speaking city, with a large portion of ethnic Greeks who were Russian speakers. So I can see that actually there will be very little people speaking Russian after the war. And from the very beginning of independence, we had writers switching from Russian into Ukrainian, and it goes on still. I mean, the most famous writer from Donetsk, Volodymyr Rafeenko, who received 2 major literary prizes in Russia before 2013. After the beginning of the war, in 2014, he was already 2 times refugee. He lost his home. He was with his wife 3 weeks under occupation near Bucha. He almost died. And last September, he said that he will not last year, September, he said that he will never write a word in Russian again. So he is writing in Ukrainian. Then the text is edited by, the first novel he wrote in Ukrainian was edited by Andrey Kurkov, a very good translator and essayist and intellectual and poet. So he will never go back to Russian. Of course, the majority of bookshops now don't want to sell books in Russian, so it doesn't make sense for the publishers to publish them. So the authors, actually who write in Russian, I mean, they have their books in Ukrainian translation as first edition. And I think my diary, which is not here, of invasion was published only in Ukrainian. But it was not the only book that was published only in Ukrainian without Russian.
But would you write fiction in Ukrainian now, or do you want to stick to Russian?
Well, level of my Russian is much higher than level of my Ukrainian. I learned Ukrainian when I was 14 in the Soviet times. I wrote poetry actually when I was teenager in Russian, English and Ukrainian. And after the university, I worked as an editor in Ukrainian State Publishing House at Dnipro, where I was editing translations from foreign languages into Ukrainian. But to write fiction in Ukrainian, my Ukrainian is not up for this, because I mean I like experiments, sort of structural, and I like inventing new words and new forms of words, and I feel much more comfortable. And actually, it is my mother tongue. Yeah.
Sure, but there's also, I mean, there's been a great outpouring of Ukrainian culture, whether it's, you know, literature or, you know, wearing embroidered shirts or whatever. There is an assertion of the independence of Ukrainian culture in the face of the Russian onslaught. But there's also a doctrinaire angle to it. And I mean, there was a piece in the Times, which some of you may have seen yesterday, about you being, inverted commas, cancelled because you appeared on a stage with Masha Gessen. Many of you may be familiar with Masha Gessen. Masha Gessen is she's a Russian who's lived in America for a long time. She's a dissident. She's gay. She's as anti-Putin as you can get. And yet, because she is of Russian origin, many Ukrainians think that no Ukrainian should appear on the same stage as her. I mean,
well, in fact, actually, in May, Ukrainian participants of the New York Pen Festival,
yes,
they were ready to have her as a moderator, but they were not told that there will be 2 more political immigrants from Russia. When they found out, they refused to have this panel. So the Russian participants were removed from the festival, and they had their event somewhere on the side. But of course, Masha was upset. She resigned from PEN America, where she was vice president, and she commented in her article that this was a cruel gesture from the Ukrainian side. And I think this was what provoked hate against Masha Gessen, yes.
But what about yourself? Because what do you feel about appearing on stages with, you know, Russian dissidents like Masha?
I think Masha is considered American in America, actually. Nobody takes her as a Russian. She left the Soviet Union as a child in 1981. Yeah. Yeah, and I didn't see really a problem, especially since she was accused by Ukrainians that she repeats everywhere that this is the war of Putin and not war of Russian people.
Right.
So, I mean, there were points which we could discuss during this event, and the event was the main event of the Toronto Literary Festival with large audience, opened by Margaret Atwood. And I thought it was important to be present and to be in dialogue and to disagree if I had something to disagree, and I disagreed, and actually we had this conversation about whether it is Putin's war or not, and in the end she agreed that this is actually war of Russian people and not just a war run by one leader of this country.
But there's also, I mean, I was at the ballet at Christmas in Kiev, and they were not doing the Nutcracker because Tchaikovsky, they didn't want Tchaikovsky, they were doing some other thing and so on. So you've got a big sort of move against Russian culture, and yet many of the ballet dancers had, you know, they had danced with the Bolshoi in happier times and so on. So it's quite complicated, the rejection of Russian culture, isn't it? Because there is an intertwining of Russian and Ukrainian culture as well as the distinct
Well, I mean, the rejection is actually the instrument to cut off all the ties of the past with Russian culture. And it is conscientious.
It's a conscious decision.
It is a conscientious decision, actually. And this decision, in a way, helped to promote Ukrainian culture abroad. Because, I mean, in the West, in Europe, people were surprised last year, and editors were surprised to find out that there is classical Ukrainian literature. You know, it was never translated because people in the West thought that from this territory comes only great Russian literature, only Tolstoy, Chekhov, and Dostoevsky. So nobody heard about Kvitka Osnovyanenko, Mikhailo Kotyubinsky, Panas Myrny, Lesya Ukrainka, etc. So only now these books are being translated and will be published. So in a way, without this war, Ukraine would remain in the shadow of Russian culture and would not be seen. And it's not only actually Russian guilt, I would say, that Ukrainian culture is not known. Russia was investing millions and millions of euros in promotion of their culture, and they were using this promotion as soft power. In fact, actually, last year the director of the Museum Hermitage in Petersburg said that Russian culture is a part of special operation.
Wow.
You can read. I think
that's
this
amazing.
interview was published. Yeah, and in Ukraine, politicians never cared about culture because they were cared only about money, economy, finances, etc. How to become rich, but they didn't think about image of the country because image is created by culture, not
Yes.
only by the trade.
And so you're travelling a lot. So is the promotion of Ukrainian culture, is that part of what you think your responsibility is, in a sense?
I think it is a responsibility of any Ukrainian writer or intellectual who travels abroad, because we have to explain what people don't know about Ukraine and what people don't know about this war, because people think that this is something separate. It is connected only with Putin, it's connected only with the collapse of the Soviet Union and dream of Putin to restore Russian Empire. In fact, actually, this is the new battle of the war, which started in 1709 with Poltava battle.
Go on, you better explain that to us, because not all of us have got the history.
Well, if you listen to Putin carefully, you probably noticed that 10 years ago he was saying that his favorite Tsar is Ivan the Terrible,
yes,
which was logical. And then before the war he started saying that the best Tsar was Peter the Great.
Yeah.
But Peter the Great actually was quite pro-European. He traveled in Europe, he learned how to build ships in Holland, etc. He invited lots of Germans to be engineers and doctors in St. Petersburg in Russian Empire. But also he, with his army, defeated the Ukrainian army of Hetman Mazepa near Poltava, who was supported by Swedish King Charles XII.
Yeah.
And Hetman Mazepa had to flee to Bessarabia. And 11 years later, in 1720, Peter the Great signed the first decree against Ukrainian language. He banned publication of Ukrainian religious texts and ordered removal of all Ukrainian texts from the churches on the controlled territory.
That's fascinating.
And between 1720 and 1917, there were more than 40 decrees limiting or banning Ukrainian culture, language, theater, education in Ukrainian. Catherine the Great banned Ukrainian language as language of education in Kyiv-Mohyla Academy. It's the oldest university in Kyiv. So, there are lots of decrees and laws you can find. And this was part, actually, to crush Ukrainians, to assimilate them. Because of the difference in mentality, because Ukrainians were individuals, they were not loyal to Russian Tsars, and actually until 1654 they didn't care about Russian Empire because they lived on their territory, they were in the war all the time, but they were happy in a way. And in 1654, during the Polish-Ukrainian War, number 5 and number 7, Hetman Bogdan Khmelnytsky asked Russian Tsar for military help. And this was the beginning of the end of Ukrainian independence. And since then, actually, Russians understood that they have to assimilate Ukrainians in order to control them and to be sure that they are loyal. And the instrument of assimilation was the Russian language. Because Ukrainian identity, as any identity, is made of language, culture, and history. If you force people to forget their mother tongue and they start speaking Russian, then instead of Ukrainian culture and Ukrainian history, their culture is Russian and their history is Russian. And that happened actually on large part of Ukraine, practically central and eastern and southern Ukraine, except for the western Ukraine, which was annexed by Stalin according to the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact before the Second World War. And after 1991, the mentality was coming back faster than Ukrainian language. So that's why you have so many Russian speakers, but they are not collective, they are individualists.
Right, so this is the point where, at independence, when the culture begins to assert itself. But one of the fascinating things, and if you'll excuse me a minute, one of the most fascinating stories I've done since being in Ukraine, when I was in Kherson, were Potemkin's bones. You know Potemkin, who was Catherine the Great's lover, and he founded the city of Kherson and Mariupol and Odessa and lots of places. And I had heard that the Russian soldiers who'd been occupying Kherson had taken his bones from the crypt of the cathedral. Yeah. So I went to the cathedral and I found the priest, and I said, "Is it true?" And he said, "Yes, let me show you." And so he picked up, the floor, and we went down to the crypt, and I saw the slab where Potemkin's bones had lain for 200 years. And on the orders of someone, and I think it was Putin, Russian soldiers had come before they had left Kherson, when the Ukrainians were pushing them out, and they had taken these bones and removed them, and presumably they're now, I don't know, in Moscow or St. Petersburg. So, I mean, tell me how you interpret that, of what that meant to the Russians.
Well, I mean, they took some other bones also of
yes.
military Russian admirals.
Well, they knocked down some statues and all sorts of things, but Potemkin's bones were the ones that got me.
I mean, you should understand that Russian Orthodox Church is a fundamentalist instrument.
Right.
And all the bones can be used to fortify the belief of people.
Yes.
Because, I mean, I think that actually Potemkin will be announced saint sooner or later, and then the bones will be spread in the new churches to attract attention. But the bones, for example, and the skull of another saint, Admiral Ushakov, in St. Petersburg, are used for patriotic education of the sea cadets. And they have actually, at the ceremony of receiving their diplomas, they have to kiss the skull of this mummy.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, the photos are available on internet.
It's very, it's sort of, I don't know, medieval, I suppose.
It is medieval, yeah. I mean, they're going back. I mean, Russia is going back, and actually it's incredible that it is possible to force people to turn from the progress, from the future, and just dive into the dark past.
Yeah, no, it is interesting, and I think like we've seen that. I mean, I think that we saw that with, Al Qaeda and Islamic State and so on. It's a sort of similar thing where people go back to a previous interpretation. Let's talk a little bit about what's happening in the war now, because I think that and I blame journalists. They're terrible people. In a sense, we built up the summer offensive as being something that was very critical, and I think, and then the progress has been slow, which then is not surprising when you start to look at it militarily. Is this something that you're worried about?
I think everybody is worried about this.
Yeah.
But at the same time, according to the census?
Yeah.
Yeah, 80% of Ukrainians are not ready for any compromise. So everybody is hoping that still, with the Western aid, the Ukrainians will be able to liberate all the territories. Mm-hmm. But of course, I mean, the longer the war lasts, the more difficult is it to liberate the territory, because it gives time to Russians to prepare better fortifications. In Russia, the factories that produce missiles working 24 hours a day. I hope that in Ukraine also. So what we will have not frozen war, but frozen front line for some time until I hope Ukraine will make a breakthrough, but it will cost thousands and thousands, of course, of lives, and it costs already a lot.
Costs a lot of lives, and also, I mean, the 4 layers of defences, which include landmines, which are sewn so close together that I've read that it would take 750 years to get rid of those landmines. So even if Ukraine were to regain all of that territory in the east, what can you do with it? It's just full of landmines.
Well, I mean, you can blow them up. I think it would be nice to discuss this after the victory.
Okay. Yeah.
Because I think if Ukraine manages to liberate the territories, there will be such a huge motivation, not only in Ukraine but outside, there will be so many volunteers coming to Ukraine to rebuild the country, because 30% of the country is destroyed. And every day, actually, between 60 and 110 infrastructure buildings or institutions are destroyed by Russians. So, I mean, we are talking about probably hundreds of thousands of things to be rebuilt. And then, I mean, demining is a very specific process, and every country wants to learn how to do it.
But it takes a very, very long time. I mean, some people in this room and myself have done a lot of filming and demining, and it takes a long time.
I can give you the address in France, where you don't have access to a small part of the forest because it is mined from the First World War.
Exactly.
It's near Vimy, because at that time, I mean, the war was horrible. I mean, they were shooting at each other with shells which weighed 400 or 300 kilos.
Wow.
And these shells, they very often wouldn't explode and would go down into the earth, into the soil, 10 meters or 15 meters down.
Wow.
And then they were pushed by the underground waters to the surface, and then 50 years later they would blow up if somebody would just drive there or walk.
Wow. Tell us a bit about Crimea, because I think one of the things that you hear floated in Western diplomatic circles is this sort of idea, oh, well, yes, the Ukrainians need to get the Donbass back, but Crimea is Russian really, so maybe they can do a deal. Explain why Ukrainians go absolutely nuts when you say that.
Well, first of all, Crimea was independent kingdom of Crimean Tatars.
Yes.
It was Crimean Khaganate, it was called. And then when Russian Tsarina, I don't remember already, probably Catherine also, sent Suvorov to take it, and
from the Ottomans.
He failed first. It was made like under protection of Turkish Ottoman Empire, yes. But the majority of the inhabitants at that time were Crimean Tatars.
Right, who are Muslims.
And then when Russia did take it, they started bringing Russian population, of course, to outnumber Crimean Tatars, Karaims, Krimchaks, and other minorities, But in 1954, in fact, Crimea was passed from Russian Federation to Ukraine for economical reasons, because only from Ukraine Crimea could be supplied with water, electricity, and gas. And in exchange, part of eastern Ukraine went to Russian Federation. Because if you look at the old postcards, there are wonderful postcards from Ukraine, from the city of Belgorod, for example, which is today Russia.
Which is today Russia,
yes. And since then, actually, Crimea was part of Ukraine.
And Ukrainians feel it as part of Ukraine.
And Ukrainians, I mean, for Ukrainians, actually, annexation itself was the main pain. And the fact that actually the West didn't react to this, I mean,
in 2014 when the Russians annexed.
Because nobody cared about Crimea in Europe. That's why actually Putin decided to grab more land and attacked Ukraine last year.
Yeah, because there was no reaction when he did that. But before I open it up, I mean, so your book Grey Bees is very much about what war has done to Ukrainian society, and the previous ones written before the war. Can you write fiction which is not about the war now? Can you write about something completely different?
I cannot, but I mean, I was writing a novel about civil war of 1918-1921 before the invasion, and it was already the third novel in the series. And I stopped. I couldn't continue for 18 months. I managed this summer in August in Kiev to restart this novel, but this novel also about Bolsheviks taking Kiev for the second time in 1919. So it's about the war, it's about the occupation of Kiev, it's about the rules and surreal laws that they were introducing, trying to control people, to make them loyal, to break them down, to kill them.
So it's about then, but it's really about now.
It is about now and about them because there are lots of similarities. In fact, Kiev was attacked on 24th of February 22 from the same northeastern part as in 1918.
Oh, is that right?
By the Red Army. And the same streets in central Kiev, in historical Kiev, were bombed on the 10th of October last year, as they were bombed in 1918 by General Muravyov.
Wow.
So, I mean...
So history echoes...
Yeah, and if you think that yesterday this horrible attack against Israel happened on birthday of Putin.
Oh, did it?
Yes.
No, I didn't know that.
And many years ago, Anna Politkovskaya was killed on Putin's birthday as the birthday present for Putin. So I mean, for him and for some Russians, I mean, these historical parallels are extremely important, and that's why the bones of Potemkin are so important to them also.
All this symbolism.
Yeah.
So this is the novel you're working on at the moment, and you're writing it in Russian. And when are you hoping that will come out?
Well, I'm writing the third novel, and the first novel, which is called The Silver Bone, will be out in English on the 5th of March next year.
Excellent.
So
Something
very
to
soon,
look
yeah.
forward to. Very good. Okay, let me open it up for questions. Politics, literature, culture. I think we can take it all, can't we? I'm afraid we don't have, without microphones, so I hope you've heard us. I should have checked that you could hear us at the back. Yes, you could. Very good. Okay. Excellent. Does anybody have any questions for Andrey? Yes, lady in the front here.
Hi. It's a softer maybe question.
Soft question is good. We like soft question as well as hard question.
See where it goes. Could you talk a bit about your process, your writing process, who inspires you, and how it's been kind of writing, kind of with. I've seen the images of your kind of you writing in your home. Kind of.
Well, I have lots of places in Kiev and in the village. Actually, I mean, I have 3 tables, 3 desks in the village where I work depending on what I write and in which mood I am. I love writing in cafes, but in fact, actually, from the beginning of 90s, I was always starting writing very early in the morning, like 5 o'clock in the morning, 4:30, and I would write fiction until 11 o'clock. Then I would have breakfast and would have a walk, and then I would change the place and would write a film script or something else. And for many years I was writing also while listening to the depressive classical music. Because my problem is that I was born as a pathological optimist. So I always was in a good mood. And I liked writing dramatic stuff. So you cannot actually be happy and writing something about difficult situations. So for that I would listen mostly to Gustav Mahler, Schoenberg and Bach and heavy music, which would suppress my mood and make me a bit either irritated or unhappy.
But I would have thought that you're much too well known to write in cafes. Surely if you start to write in a cafe, everybody comes up and says, oh, you're Andrey Kurkov.
No.
They respect you.
I mean, writers are not rock singers, especially in Ukraine. So, I mean, very few people read.
Is that right?
Well, I mean, if you think about the print runs, even the print runs of the books by the most famous Ukrainian writers, I mean, we are talking about like 1,000 copies sold per year.
Is that really?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
We have a limited number of bookshops. We have very underdeveloped book market with lots of problems. And the main buyer of the books is the state, when the state is buying books for libraries.
Wow.
So I mean, it's similar to Croatia in a way, but maybe in Croatia situation is better now. Because in Croatia, publishers, they knew that the state would buy 250 copies for the libraries, so they would print 300 copies. 250 copies for the libraries and 50 for the sale. So I mean, in Ukraine, it's less dramatic, but it is comparable.
Why do you think that is? I mean, given you know, we've talked about the richness of Ukrainian culture. I mean, we haven't mentioned Taras Shevchenko, who is the national poet, who there's a statue of him in pretty much every town in Ukraine has Taras Shevchenko, and you can always tell it's him because he has the best moustache in the world. So given that sort of veneration for the national poet and so on, I'm surprised that people aren't buying
Well, the
books.
problem is that every new book in Ukraine, once published, immediately gets a free scan on internet. So I mean, the pirates' copies are available immediately. So I mean, the students who don't have money to buy books, they are looking for these text or PDF files in internet,
Right, that's
which means that less copies are sold.
I see. Okay, that's
But
interesting.
also, I mean, I think the people who are buying books, they are, well, not tiny minority, but they are minority.
They're a minority.
They are minority,
Yeah,
yes.
absolutely. Lady in the denim jacket.
Thank you very much. I was wondering, I'm an AAA, an Andrey Addict Anonymous, and my
That's
first
nice.
drug was, and I don't know the English original title, was Petrovich. And I always wondered what made you choose that confluence of realistic and surrealist style, and because I wondered if you felt more protected by choosing a surrealist combination versus just sticking to realism.
Well, I think there are several reasons for this. First of all, I mean, at the age of 7, I started writing poetry, and when I was 13, I started inventing jokes because we had a very rich anti-Soviet and not anti-Soviet jokes culture. And my brother with his friends very often shared jokes, which I loved, and I decided to invent jokes. And we took 2 times with my brother part in the illegal joke telling competitions in the Kremlin. And once we won because of my jokes. And then I started writing poetry, but for me, realism was something very Soviet. So I mean, I had allergy against, because we had socialist realism, but of course, I mean, when you think about realism, so, that you just portray what is happening in reality, it seems boring, and it seemed then Soviet. So I was trying to use absurdity, and I mean, we had a lot of absurdity in life. In fact, actually, in 1991, I was very happy that the Soviet Union disappeared, but I was very upset or worried that now we will have a normal civilized life and there will be no absurdity in life. I was wrong, of course. I mean,
Yes.
that's why I'm still writing. But generally, for me, the limits, the frames of realism, I mean, they are like prison. So I mean, my imagination is a bit more wide.
That's really.
Yeah.
Lady in the black here.
There was a young man over there.
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and then we'll come to you. Yes.
Sorry about that. Yeah, quick question. If you weren't a writer, who would you be?
Ooh,
If I were not a writer,
Yeah.
what would you be?
well, I could be a translator from the Japanese language. I have diploma of the translator. I could be a journalist. I could be a film script writer. But my first profession was disinfectionist. Because I mean, after the school, I went to the medical disinfection courses, and I worked as a disinfectionist for 5 or 6 months in a hospital near Kiev. And it was fun because I was disinfecting mattresses and clothes. So I had a huge machine in 2-story building, which I had to fill with this stuff, and then press the green button at 9 o'clock in the morning, and at 5 o'clock I had to press red button to stop it. And in between I could write. So I think this was the ideal job.
Excellent. Lady in the black.
Yes, I read last year your great piece, and I also read your Ukraine diaries, and my question is about Ukraine diaries. Do you always write diaries? Because I think what I find always fascinating if I read diaries is that they are not written with the benefit of hindsight. So, you know, you write down what happens, and when you read them, you can what's the background of them, or was it a specific situation that you decided to write diaries and then also publish them? And the second question is, do you change anything? When you read what you wrote in the diaries, are you ever tempted to say, well, actually this sentence is probably not so important?
Yeah, sort of editing as you go along. Yeah.
Well, I started writing diaries for myself at the age of 15. And in 2013, in the autumn, I was writing a collection of essays for my Austrian publisher, explaining difference between Russian history, Ukrainian history, and all these things which are not known still in the West. And when my dance started, I stopped. I understood that I cannot continue because I don't know what is happening. I was involved in the Orange Revolution, and I was very suspicious in the end of November 2013, because I thought this is some kind of artificial protest organized by the administration of President Yanukovych. So I started actually, I lived near Maidan, so I was going there sometimes 2 or 3 times a day to meet people, to talk to them, to try to understand. And then I called my publisher and I told him that I cannot continue with the collection of essays, but I will write, I don't know what is happening, but I will describe it and I will write a diary. So if you want, we can actually then publish this diary, and what I wrote for the collection of essays can be added to the book as explanatory notes. He agreed. So every evening I was sending actually what I wrote to translator in Berlin. He would translate and send it to Innsbruck to the publishing house, and the publisher would collect the notes for the book. So I couldn't change it.
You couldn't change it?
Yeah, but also I was, I knew that it will be published, but I didn't want to write purposely for the publication. So I was writing just like before, also about my family, my kids, my friends, and things, sort of trivial things, ordinary things. And I thought that when the book will be finished, then I will tell him what to remove. And because the situation escalated into the war, annexation in the war, I forgot about it. So when the book was published in German and then French, my daughter was very upset because she found that she was not sympathetic enough in the book. There were some situations. Yeah. But then when the book was in preparation in London, the publisher sent me notes from the lawyer, 272 questions.
Oh God, that's
yes, because here, publishers are afraid of
oh yes,
court cases.
they very much are.
So I was asked to remove some of my quotations about acting Ukrainian politicians, etc., and something about my kids was also slightly edited.
Well, in case your kids sued you.
Yeah. If you read German version or French, it is all there.
Oh dear, any more questions? Yes, so I'm going to go to the lady in white, and then the lady in green, and then the gentleman there. Lady in white.
I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your choice of characters who seem to be on the periphery of society, and how you use them to sort of expose the flaws and the cracks in the system. They all seem to be struggling somewhere on the margins, and I wondered why you choose those.
Well, because I think if somebody is successful and happy and macho and Superman, he or she are not interested. They achieved, this is a happy story, and a novel is usually, a novel is about a conflict, it's about a problem, about overcoming the things. And in fact, actually, when I was writing Jimi Hendrix's life in Lemberg, I met lots of homeless people in Lviv. And they made it into the novel, together with the lady who organized for them social hostel and workshop, and created an NGO which cares about these people so that they could get back to normal life. And as the result, actually, I got involved in this organization which is called Emmaus International. It was started by Abbé Pierre, a French priest, Catholic priest, after the Second World War. And now all of my family is involved in different kind of charities, either for homeless or for the elderly, etc., and my kids. And I think this is, I would say, this is also a possibility to talk about this problem. So, I mean, you asked because you noticed it.
Yeah.
But I think it's a really interesting observation because
Yeah.
it's definitely true. You think of Death and the Penguin. I mean, Victor, sorry, but Victor, he is on the margin, isn't he, writing these obituaries,
Yeah,
and then, and so it's a very interesting.
yeah. But you are right. I mean,
Yeah.
you are right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just like where it exposes, you know, it creates pathos, but also the comedy as well.
Yes,
That's in your book.
I suppose. Yeah. Lady in Green.
Were there any characters you found it particularly hard to like let go of or to stop writing about and like once you'd finished the novel, were there any characters that you really found you were thinking about for a long time and you couldn't let go of?
You mean the novel which I restarted now?
Any of the novels, I think, any of the characters you've written about. It must have been quite hard to lose that penguin.
Well, with the penguin, I mean, there was another story because when the book was published in German, I was accused by some readers in being cruel to animals. And 7 years later, I had to write a sequel with happy end for penguin. Yeah. But I mean, I have a couple of novels which I never finished because, but not because of the problem with the characters, because I lost interest. Because I write only when I'm myself surprised by what I write, and I write in order to check if my feeling about this story will be fulfilled. I mean, sort of that. Well, in a way, I'm writing to find out what happens next. I think I know, but I want to check. And if suddenly I lose interest, and it can happen because of the characters, that they are not live enough, or they are not motivated enough, something is wrong, then I give up. But I mean, it happened a couple of times, it didn't happen more often. Yeah.
Gentleman in the front there, you had a question.
Hi, so if you could meet any one person from history, who would it be and why?
Sorry,
If you could meet any one person from history, who would it be and why?
It's a good question.
Tricky one.
It's a very good question, yeah.
Or just his hand, anyway.
I had some ideas. I mean, I would like to meet Emanuel Swedenborg, a Swedish philosopher and a writer who wrote lots of very strange diaries, heavenly diaries about his life in the paradise. That would be great. But also, I mean, if we talk about writers, I'd like to meet Jack London.
Yes.
I visited his grave recently and his house and all this, the ruins of the building of his dream that was finished and then burned down, so he never managed to live in this house and to meet because he was dreaming of his friends coming and staying. There was lots of rooms and swimming pool and everything and nature. And so then the house burned down when it was finished and he died. And his widow turned another house into his museum. Yeah.
It's interesting because Jack London is not a fashionable writer anymore. A lot of people have not heard of Jack London these days. So
but I mean, he was one of my favorite writers when I was 14 or 13.
Yeah.
And I read, we had 14 volumes because in the Soviet time, the good writers were published in many volumes of the same color. And there was 14 volumes edition of Jack London, and I read them from
White
one
fan.
to... Yeah.
Oh, that's it, yeah. Right, interesting. Okay, any more questions do we have? Yes, lady there.
Yes. Could you tell us what your inspiration for the Penguin book was? Because he was wonderful. And
Yes.
although he was, the Death and Penguin was very concerning, and it was quite a frightening book in many ways. The character of the Penguin was very memorable.
Well, in fact, I wanted to write two separate novels. One about unemployed journalist who gets a job of writing obituaries for the newspaper, about still living VIPs, and another story about a penguin being adopted by a lonely man who is dumped by his girlfriend. And then I realized that this is one novel. And this novel was about, I would say, the most difficult time in the Ukrainian history, post-Soviet years, when the country disappeared, but people remained. And they were afraid of new reality, they couldn't understand it, there were no rules. In fact, actually, when the Soviet Union collapsed, my parents were afraid they were retired already, they were afraid to go out of the flat. And then there was hyperinflation, there was no money, the police didn't work, so if you had a problem, you had to address to mafia, and they would be judges in the conflict situation, for example. And I remember that when I earned first $100, I invested them in bulletproof door to our apartment. And so, I mean, this novel is about how representative of collective mentality, Soviet man who was anti-Soviet, finds it almost impossible to become an individual, to become self-confident and self-reliant. So, I mean, he is socially lonely, and penguins are the best examples of collective animals, but they are programmed by their nature. They can live only in groups. So if you separate a penguin and put it on an uninhabited island, this penguin loses the orientation. He cannot himself decide where to go, what to do. So in a way, it's about two kinds of lonelinesses. The artificial loneliness of the penguin, because Misha is separated from the group, yeah. And this kind of new natural loneliness of a person who should learn how to be able to survive on his own.
It's a wonderful book. It really is wonderful. Any more questions? No? They're all satisfied.
Yes,
Gentleman there.
So the new book, The Single Bone, could be said is crime fiction, historical crime fiction in a way. It's kind of police. Did you read a lot of crime fiction before that, or in particular to write this book?
I'll just repeat the question in case you didn't hear it. It's about the new novel. What's it called? Silverbone?
Silverbone.
Silverbone, which is a kind of crime fiction, according to the gentleman. Did you read a lot of crime fiction before?
I didn't read much. I mean, I watched Poirot and Maigret,
Right.
British series many years ago, and I love David Suchet, etc. I read some Agatha Christie, but this novel is actually a mix of historical novel and crime story, because I started writing actually these novels because in 2017 a lady called me, one of my readers in Kiev, and she said she has a present for me and asked for my address, and then she brought me a box of original files of VCK, of Bolshevik secret police.
Oh, wow.
From 1919 till 1927, and the cases were in or around Kiev, and some cases were not real. I mean, they were political cases, but I mean, I read this, and I loved history always. I mean, I wrote a trilogy and 2 novels about Soviet history. And so I started researching more. And in fact, actually, in the first novel, in the Silverbone, the crime story is invented. It's not real, but the details of daily life are authentic. In the second novel, which will be published in 2025, it's based already on a real case. Yeah. But I was never a big fan of crime literature, frankly speaking.
There's a lady over there has a question.
I'm actually reading your American invasion, and you said something really interesting that I have a question for regarding patriotism and Facebook. On the 21st of January, you noticed that there was more patriotism on Facebook than there was actually in real life in Ukraine. And I just want to know what your lens is on social media now with the full scale of the war.
Well, social media is a very dangerous instrument, as you know.
And do you use it quite a lot?
I use it, well, less than other people who are much more active, but I do read a lot on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, and I follow what is happening there. Because, for example, if some kind of cyberbullying started, it takes incredible sort of energy on the way, and different campaigns which are run by activists on Facebook. I mean, they are very interesting to follow and to study. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, why do you think people weren't interested in? You mentioned that Facebook was the only place that you noticed patriotism for the celebration. Is it January 21st? And why was that? And why wasn't it happening in Ukraine? And now all of a sudden, it's changed. Like I noticed. Why do you think that? You questioned, and you still don't know the answer for that. That's what you wrote.
Well, I think there were moments when you could find more patriotism on Facebook than in real life. It's true. I mean, now it's probably, I'm not sure. Now in real life you have more patriotism, especially connected with funerals of the soldiers, which take place every day in hundreds of villages and towns, etc. So I mean, but before the war, very often it was like hyped up. The campaigns, the patriotic campaigns, so reminding the date, important date in the history of Ukraine through Facebook. Yeah.
So I suppose that's really, I mean, it's an interesting question because that is the changing reality of Ukraine during the war. That's one of the things.
And also, I mean, we have a bit of a mess with national holiday or national days, because I mean, like we have 2 or 3 Independence Days, which have different names but have the same meaning. And people actually, some people got fed up with it. So when Zelensky announced another day of independence, then people didn't react. And I was walking the street and looking for the Ukrainian flags hanging from the windows, and there were no flags. But on Facebook, there were lots of flags, and actually some, maybe from Zelensky's party, people were pushing actually this through Facebook, this new date.
Any more questions? Or yes, we'll go to this lady. And
do you have specific audiences in mind when you start a book and are writing it? Are there themes that you're taking across several books, or issues you want to explore across your books, or each one stands alone as issues that are at that time in your mind?
Well, I mean, I didn't plan to write Grey Bees. I didn't want to write anything about the war until the war is over. But after 2015, we got a lot of new inhabitants of Kiev who moved from Donetsk. And the first wave were middle-class people, business people, who had already bought property before the war in Kiev and around Kiev. And then we had influx of refugees, poor people. And I started meeting these people. And I met one young man who had a shop in Donetsk, and then he tried to open a small cafe somewhere on the outskirts of Kiev. And he told me that he goes every month by car almost to the front line, to a village in Donbass, where there are only 7 families remained, everybody else left. And there is no electricity, no gas, no shops, no pharmacy, no authorities in this village. And he's bringing them pills, medications and things they ask for. And after this conversation, actually, I started thinking about this gray zone, the zone between positions of the separatists and Russian, so-called volunteers, and Ukrainian army. And I traveled 3 times in the war zone between 2015 and 17. Once, with a couple of my colleagues, we actually drove all the front line along until Severodonetsk on the border of Lugansk region and Russia. And by 2017, there were about 200 or more books written about war in Donbass, but there was nothing written about civilian population, which got stuck in the war. It was only about battles and fighters and heroes and traitors, etc. So I decided to give voice to people because I realized that there were several thousand people living in the grey zone in the abandoned villages, and they didn't know what to expect, how to survive. They were visited sometimes by the volunteers who were bringing them they were bringing them their own mobile phones so that they could call their friends and relatives, because there was no chance in it. And I was shocked that nobody wrote about these people. That's why I decided to write.
And there's even more of those people now, of course, because there are so many old people, elderly people living in these places right up there near Kupiansk, Liman.
I think this grey zone which I described, it doesn't exist anymore.
No.
No, because I mean the Russian tanks destroyed everything.
But I'm talking about, I mean, you come across all the time old people who you can't, in the war zone, who I can't believe they're still there.
People, it's interesting because I mean, there are lots of people who don't want to be evacuated.
That's right, yeah.
When you are talking about older people, you can more or less understand that they want to die where they lived and where their relatives buried. I mean, I talked to these kind of people, and I mean, they had to choose between two fears: fear of becoming a refugee, not knowing what will happen to you and where will you end up, and fear of being killed at home. So they would prefer to be killed at home. But when you have middle-aged people and even sometimes with kids. Usually it means that actually they are pro-Russian, and they are waiting this territory to become Russian.
Certainly, I think we've all come to. So I'm going to have to bring it to a close, but let me ask one more thing. I was looking at some of the stuff you've written, and you said that the war in some ways was like entering a dark room and not being able to turn on the light. But then you've also talked about your optimism, that by character you are very optimistic. So I'm just wondering where you are at the moment on that. Do you still feel you're in the dark room and not able to turn on the light, or are you feeling optimistic?
No, I'm in control. I mean, I'm a realist and I'm still an optimist, I would say grey optimist, because I understand that this war is run on three levels. I mean, on the ground level, it is war for the territory. Middle level, this is a war against Ukrainian identity, because it is Ukrainian identity that pushes the Ukrainians to defend their territory.
Yes.
And on the top level, it is geopolitical war between North Korea, Russia, Iran against Western values, against Western civilization. And this actually, the top level of this war gives me hope, because I understand, and I think everybody understands, that if Ukraine loses this war, it means that Western civilization lost war to the countries which are finding themselves in Middle Ages. And it will mean that actually Russia can dominate in the world and can break the international laws, and international justice, international rules don't mean anything if it happens. So this gives me hope that actually the West understands the danger of Ukraine losing this war.
And on the other two levels?
On the other two levels, Ukraine is capable of winning. Yeah.
Excellent. Andrey Kurkov, it's been a privilege. Thank you very much. Andrey's books are there, and if you ask him nicely, I'm sure he'll sign them for you.